We begin Managerial Economics. We're using this little textbook here by Managerial Economics by Maurice and Thomas. And before we begin with chapter 1, which is we're going to get in about 1 hour, the first hour I just want to make an elementary introduction to economics. What is economics about? So, what is the subject of economics about? First and foremost, the subject of economics is about choices and about decisions. You have all made the choice to study MBA. You have allotted time, possibly 1, maybe 2 years to study. You're probably paying a good amount of money for the tuition of the university. So economics is about choices and decisions. Why did you decide to pay so much money and spend 2 years of your lives studying for an MBA? Well, economics provides the answers, or again, finance will also provide the answer, but economics is the broader subject, and finance is much more specialized and focused. Now, what else within the same concept of choices and decisions is about using scarce resources to achieve specific goals? So, economics is about using scarce resources. Which are the scarce resources in your MBA example? The two scarce resources, they almost always are present, are time and money. Right? You're spending the scarce resource of money, and you have 2 years. I mean, you can use it in any other way. When I say any other way, I'm invoking the economic concept of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost. We will get to opportunity cost the next lecture. Opportunity cost is one of the fundamental concepts related to economic decision making. And of course, anytime you need to ask a question, just raise your hand. Do you have a question?
No, I wanted to say about the opportunity cost. Is the cost of doing the same thing, another thing at the same cost.
Right. Well, okay. So opportunity cost is what you sacrifice to accomplish one thing. In other words, instead of spending your 2 years on MBA, you could spend 2 years on art. 2 years in athletics. I don't know. It could be car driving for the guys. I don't know. Whatever your hobby is, you could just have fun or acquire a different profession, whatever your goals may be. But 2 years of your life will be gone. And, time is always scarce. Now, a very different concept within economics. I mean, these are all different ways of looking at the same thing. So, a very different way of looking at the same thing is that economics is about human action. This is about why humans do what they do. Human action we define as purposeful behavior. It didn't come to study MBA because it was just a really nice idea. You have specific purpose in mind. You are very conscious of it. You're conscious of the costs. When we say costs, meaning you use a particular scarce resource, right? Time and money. So you're conscious of what you're sacrificing, and you're doing it on particular purpose. The purpose is to achieve or get an MBA degree and hopefully provide yourself with a better life, better career, better future incomes, etc. So, economics is about human action. All right. The most fundamental, and according to some schools of Austrian economics, the only fundamental and the only defining characteristic in economics is the concept of scarcity. Scarcity. If anything is scarce, it is the subject of economics. If something is not scarce, then it is not the subject of economics. Okay? Now, you got to understand that scarcity has some, let's say, geographical implications. For example, in some areas, fresh water is extraordinarily abundant to the point that no one considers it scarce. So, it's not part of economics. Here, in Saudi Arabia, what's plentiful and abundant? Oil is shockingly scarce. Oil is, well, it's not terribly expensive. It's still dirt cheap, right? $100 is still dirt cheap. No, guys, you have a lot of sand. You have sand, okay? Sand is plentiful. You got a lot of sand. You have so much sand that its value is practically zero, right? Nobody studies, cares, does anything about sand here, okay? Now, in some other areas, like in my home country, Bulgaria, sand is an important construction material. And because it's not terribly abundant, we actually got to take care of it. We got to, do a lot of things. And sand costs money, all right? So, scarcity is the defining characteristic. We can think of air. Breathing air is actually not yet scarce. Well, could breathing air somehow become somewhat scarce? Yes. It could be. Go ahead.
Some countries started to sell air in bottles.
All right, that's just okay. That's
like bottled water.
Yeah, that's marketing tricks. But let's try it differently. Sometimes air for a whole nation, for a whole geography, maybe fairly large air. Clean air and breathable, good high quality air may become scarce, meaning you cannot get and acquire it. Then a whole subject or branch opens, which we call environmental economics, all right? So, as long as it becomes relatively scarce, it becomes part of the subject of economics. We begin to study it. Now, when it comes to scarcity, two things are always, well, a lot of things are scarce in life, but the two things which are almost sure to bet that they're always scarce are time and money. All right? So, scarcity. What is scarcity? It is just limited resources. Limited resources which are available to us, or limited availability of resources. All right? Now, you got to see that we do choices and we do decision, and economics is about how we use these scarce or limited resources. So this is just a different way of looking at the same thing. All right, so what's the next big thing? The next big thing is called trade-off. Economics is about trade-offs. Trade-off means if you can get one thing, then you cannot get something else. If you're going to be studying for these 2 years an MBA, you're not likely going to be able to study and law and informatics, computer science. All right? So, trade-off means that choosing one thing usually means that you have to give up on other opportunities, okay? It's like choosing MBA, you gotta sacrifice law.
So it's the same as opportunity cost.
Almost the same. Almost the same as opportunity cost. So that's what trade-off is. Trade-off means that increasing the use or consumption of one thing necessarily means that you have to lower the use or consumption of something else. In other words, because the resources are scarce, like time is scarce, like you got 24 hours. If you're going to be watching 6 hours TV, then you're going to be watching something, you're going to be doing other things less time. And if you want to increase from 6 to 8 times, from 6 to 8 hours, then you have to reduce some other activity. So this is part of the trade-off. And trade-off is associated naturally now with opportunity cost. So now we're getting a little closer to your opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is, this is very important definition, the next best alternative use of a particular resource. So the resource is scarce, and the opportunity cost is, if I can use it to study MBA, what is the next best thing I can use my time for? Maybe law school, maybe engineering school, I don't know, whatever it might be. You have to understand that opportunity cost for me will be different from yours, and yours, and yours. So, for different people, opportunity cost is different, especially when it comes to time. When it comes to money, again, a lot of times people have different preferences. So, for them, a lot of times opportunity cost for money will be also different too. Now we're getting into the world of investments. The opportunity cost becomes almost the same for everybody, because prices that investors see are all the same, and the trade-offs they see are all the same, but I want to get into that. All right, the next thing to understand, which is fundamental to economics, is that economists always use marginal analysis. Why would we use marginal analysis? What are we trying to do to use marginal analysis? So we use it. What do we use it for? We use it to make choices, and we use it to make decisions. In other words, let me try to explain a little bit about marginal analysis. This is what happens with the next unit. Marginal analysis is, if we're going to be having 2 lectures, what am I going to teach today for 2 classes, 2 lectures, 2 hours? Marginal analysis will say, well, if I have a 3rd hour, what is the next best thing that I'm going to teach about? So that's one type of marginal analysis. Marginal analysis within consumption is, if I have 1 juice and drink 1 juice, I want to find out what's the value of my 2nd juice. All right? So what is that extra, additional value that I get from drinking the 2nd juice, assuming or knowing that I've already drunk the first one? And then marginal analysis will mean, what's going to be the value, meaning the utility to me, of drinking my 3rd juice after I have already drunk my 2 juices? So marginal analysis is analysis that is applied only to the last unit of something, to the last unit of money, to the last unit of time, to the last unit of a consumption good, to the last unit of investments. In other words, I got certain investments. I got some oil, some gold, some real estate, and whatnot. And then I just got extra 1,000 income, okay? Marginal analysis, how best I will invest that extra 1,000 on the margin, considering that I already have a particular portfolio with particular risk structure, in other words, with particular risk and return profile. All right? So, you cannot just say, oh, you have 1,000, the best thing to do is go and buy gold. Not necessarily. Maybe I already have a lot of gold and I don't need to buy more. Again, marginal means only after you consider everything else you have or how else you're using the resource, how you're going to use the next available resource. All right. The next big thing in economics is efficiency and productivity. So what is efficiency or productivity? They're almost the same. I don't want to get into the technical differences. Efficiency is how well you use scarce resources or limited resources. Sometimes these limited resources in economics we call them inputs. How we use scarce resources in order to produce, in order to provide or get output. In other words, you have 2 hours. How do you use your 2 hours to learn as much as possible? I have 2 academic hours today to lecture. How do I use these 2 times 50, 100 minutes to teach as much and as at highest productivity and efficiency as possible? For a worker, a GM or somewhere, an auto manufacturer, he's got 1 hour, he's got certain time, how does he use it to produce as many parts as possible within reasonable quality? So efficiency is about turning the maximum output out of a given specified input. All right? Same thing as productivity. Usually productivity we apply to one particular unit of productive output. So productivity will mean productivity per one machine. How much can we produce with this particular machine for one day? Productivity, an example, would mean how many customers we can have with one taxi and one driver for 24 hours. So one taxi driver could make barely 20 kilometers with customers a day for 24 hours in a car, and another one could make 1,500 maybe kilometers. Why not? He'll just make a trip to Bahrain and back, right? There you have 1,500 kilometers, 15 hours, 100 kilometers per hour. So productivity is how much output we get with one particular unit of input. We like in economics to think in productivity per worker, productivity per person. In academia, what is our productivity number? Productivity number is the number of students which one professor services. All right? So, where I was at the American University in Bulgaria, I had roughly 160 students per semester. I was very productive. Here, I have only 70. I'm half as productive. But hopefully, the quality will be considerably better because serving less number of students per faculty, the overall quality supposedly will be better. All right? So, efficiency and productivity. Next is 7. Means. Means in economics means the same as resources. So this is just another word for it. And we also call it, especially in microeconomics, but sometimes in macro and others, inputs. Now, let's provide the examples. We already said time. We already said money. Anything else? Land. Now, some economists prefer, and many will agree, that specifically natural resources are considered a special separate type of input or a special separate type. So we can separate and put it natural resources. Of course, the biggest one being oil and gas, right? So, time, money, time. Now, the trickiest one, which always gets a professor in economics in trouble, is capital. I don't want to get me in trouble here because capital means in economics 5 completely different and unrelated things. And for me, capital means one thing, for you it means second thing, for a third person means a third thing. And in economics in general, capital has 5 completely different meanings. So it usually takes a whole lecture to understand the different meanings of what capital actually means. I don't want to get me in this trouble today in lecture 1, maybe down the road. All right, and finally, it is all about making people happy, making people satisfied. We call this in economics
Output?
No, it's not output and production. That will be the previous one. We call it utility. Utility. So, utility is the subjective benefit that a particular person feels because he is consuming a particular good. Okay? So, people usually have benefits from economic goods. So, let's use this one here. A good, which is the same as, it's usually stands short for economic good. Okay? This is this sign tilde, and it means repetition of the previous or repetition of the above. So, economic good is the same as good. Good is just the short for it. Is something which brings utility to consumers, to people in general. However, you should have in mind that an economic good need not be a good for everybody. In other words, just because something brings you utility doesn't mean in any way it will bring me any utility. And the easiest example to think about is highly specific medicine. Drug as in sick people that use a particular medicine, which for that particular sick person is a tremendous good, probably life-saving. For me, it's not good at all. I wouldn't care. And no other healthy person would care about that medicine. So, what it's important to understand is that some goods are more or less universal, and other goods are highly specific. Which are, can you provide me with some universal goods? Consumption goods, right?
Right.
Yeah, bread, yes. Even though some cultures don't eat much bread, yes. The universal good is always energy. Nothing happens in this world without energy. Now, the energy may be in the form, of course, of gas, oil, coal, electricity, or whatnot, but energy drives everything. All right? So what is the specific form of energy? Again, depends. But overall, energy is always economic good to everybody. All right? At all times. All right. So, this is the first preliminary that I had on the general stuff of economics. Now I'm making the next little topic, which is branching. Branching economics into its 2 major subjects. And the 2 major subjects of economics are microeconomics and macroeconomics. We just call it for short micro, and we just call it for short macro. All right? So, let's zoom in a little bit on micro, just a little bit, and then a lot on macro. A little bit on micro. What is micro about? It is about the decisions, choices and decisions that consumers and firms make. So it's about the decision making of, we call them sometimes individuals, sometimes we call them consumers. And firm is the same as businesses. Businesses. So it's about, sometimes individuals are called in economic households, which implies a family that lives together and makes decisions as one. In the case, a household, the whole family will possibly decide what car we're going to get or what house we're going to buy, right? Well, in Bulgaria, it's usually, right? The woman decides which house is this house, and that's it. Let's say my brother's wife said, this is the house we're going to buy, and that's the end of the story. All right, so the idea of a household is that the decision is made as one. 5 people, but they make the one decision about the car, about the house, about, I don't know, the job, whatever, you know. So, individual, household is usually written as H. That's the standard household. All right, persons. Okay, what's macro? So individuals, my mistake, guys. It's individuals, and underneath is firms. Underneath is firms, which is the same as businesses. All right. Now, MBA is about managing a business, and therefore is about how businesses make decisions. Of course, businesses make decisions also based on how consumers or individuals or households make their decisions. So, naturally, managerial economics will revolve around microeconomics. In essence, managerial economics is an extension of microeconomics. It is microeconomics as it applies to business decision making, or the decision making of businesses. All right? And this is what we'll be doing for the rest of this semester. Now, let's outline quickly in a few minutes what is the subject of macroeconomics. And this is the behavior of the overall economy. So, what does it mean, overall economy? It means, to be more specific, a number of variables which describe the behavior of the whole economy. Let's try to come up with 5, 6, or 7 major macroeconomic variables. The major macroeconomic variables. A guess? Gross domestic product. Okay, so number 1, we call it GDP. This is the gross domestic product. This is what the whole nation produces for a particular period of time. It will be a day, a week, a month, a quarter, or a year. Typically, GDP is reported either on a quarter basis, which means 3 months, or annual basis, which means 1 year. What else is a major macroeconomic variable? Anything else? I mean, these are... The stocks, yes, we can consider the stock market, and the stock market we can consider as the value of capital. Value of capital is extremely important. So, we can say stock market value. Stock market value represents the capitalization, meaning the total value of the capital, at least traded on the exchanges, and represents how valuable the capital of the whole nation is, at least traded on organized exchange. Now, this is the last. This is not very important, but it is probably number 7. What is more important than that? Well, what is the biggest macroeconomic today of Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia suffers from a big macroeconomic problem. It's every day on TV, right?
I'm not sure. I want to say something. I'm not sure it's right. What is it called? Imports and exports. Imports and exports.
This is not something Saudi Arabia suffers. Saudi Arabia has tremendous exports and a lot less imports. So we call this trade surplus. Overall, trade surpluses are considered good and is not something that Saudi Arabia suffers from. Bulgaria, which is my home country, imports a whole lot more than we export. That's because we can't produce a lot of things that foreigners want, and therefore we suffer from trade deficit. So trade deficit represents a major problem for Bulgaria. So they are important. So let's write number 3, trade deficits. Trade deficit, or trade, the opposite is surplus, is something that Bulgaria suffers from and America suffers from, but Saudi Arabia doesn't.
Inflation?
Yes, that's the big one.
Bonus?
Yes, you got it. So inflation is a major plague of Saudi Arabia today. Of course, the Emirates also suffer from inflation. Of course, inflation is ravaging through Bulgaria and Russia and most of Western Europe. And inflation is rampant in the US, although the US government doesn't report it correctly or appropriately because they like to manage the reporting. I don't want to get into that. So inflation is one of the big macro variables. Inflation. Now, let's be absolutely clear, because sometimes it's not, or sometimes it's confusing, and some textbook on purpose, I don't want to get into that. Inflation, we have a cause and an effect. The cause of inflation is increasing money supply. And the effect of inflation is rising prices. Now, is rising oil prices causing inflation? Everyone in America will tell you that rising oil is driving inflation higher.
Yes, yes.
Well, the answer is not yes.
No,
The answer is
not.
no. The printing press, remember it once and for the rest of your lives. Only the printing press drives prices higher. Oil can go to hundreds and 500 and 1,000. It cannot increase the price level higher unless the government prints up the money. You say, well, but if you increase the price of oil, then the price of gasoline is going to go up, and milk and agricultural product. And the answer is yes. If the price of oil goes up, the best way to interpret it is that oil became scarcer. If oil is scarcer, it means that its relative price will increase, but relative price to other things. So, if the government did not print money and the price of oil goes up, maybe the price of professors will go down. Professor salaries will go down. Maybe teacher salaries will go down. Maybe tables, the price of tables will go down. Maybe DVDs will go down, or video recorders will go down, or watches, or I don't know, clothes. In other words, if the government does not print money, rising prices of one thing like oil will always mean lower prices of something else. The only way that rising oil prices cause inflation, actually they never cause inflation, is for the government to print up the extra money in order to support the rising prices of other commodities. Now, in the context here, what does the government really try to do? Oil prices rise because oil becomes relatively scarcer. This means that its price got to go up relative to other goods. So those that produce oil should be becoming relatively richer because they command a relatively scarcer resource which commands a relatively high price. What the government does is prints up money to drive the prices of other goods up so as to bring the ratio back to the old ratio where oil was not as scarce. In other words, printing up the extra money deprives the owners of these resources, the resource oil, from their true benefit. Well, of course, it doesn't happen, so once they print up the money, of course, the result is oil prices go up again. And then they print some more, so it becomes, like a vicious circle. Well, this was exactly the circle of inflation, which later on resulted in stagflation throughout the 70s. All right? I'm getting too far away because this is the stuff I typically teach in other classes. Let's see what else. Well, look guys, what they all care about, all people, is, at least in America, do they have a job or they don't have a job? How do we call this? Unemployment or employment. So one of the big macro variables is unemployment. All right. Is the Saudi Riyal rising in value or falling in value? Falling in value. How do you measure the value of the Riyal? Falling, falls against what? Against the sky?
Dollars. No,
Oh, come on guys. Wait a minute. The Riyal is fixed to the dollar. A 375 Riyal for a dollar. So is it really falling?
No, if the dollar falls, the Riyal falls. If the dollar goes up,
So if the dollar, so it is linked to the dollar. How do we call this linkage of one currency to another? We got two names. Yes, one we call it currency board. The other one we call it fixed exchange rate. Fixed exchange rate means that one unit of currency is always exchanged for a fixed quantity of some other currency. Now, if the dollar rises, does it mean the Saudi Riyal rises?
yes.
Okay, not necessarily. Here's the trick. In currencies, this is the most important thing to remember because it's tricky. You must always think is when one currency rises or falls, you always must ask the questions, rises or falls against what? Against what? So, yes, it may rise against it may rise against the euro, but doesn't mean that it's actually rising. In other words, the euro may be falling at 5%. The dollar may be falling at 10%. The Australian dollar at 3%. The Japanese yen at 2%. They all may be falling at the same time, and yet when you look from the Riyal up against the yen is falling. Alright? And the yen is rising. But the yen is not rising. Okay? The yen is falling. Now comes the bigger question. Well, what do we measure it up against? What's the... so they all float against each other. So what's the benchmark?
Gold?
Yes, bonus point. The perfect answer. The benchmark is always gold. So, you have to be always careful, and when you say that a currency rises or falls, you must always say up against what? Against euro, yen, or what? Not dollar, or it is always implied against gold. Of course, now, well, at least for the last 3, 4, 5 years, we have had all world currencies falling. Yen, dollar, everything else. Well, this simply means that the price of gold has been going up in all paper currencies, in all fiat currencies. So these are important things. I'm just giving you some, I teach a lot of macro full courses, so these are some of the little tricky points. So the next big thing in macroeconomics is the value of the currency. Currency value. Some other textbooks use the exchange rate, okay? The exchange rate. But here's the problem with the exchange rate and the value of the currency. The problem is the value of the currency, again, against what? Against the dollar? All right? Against the yen? Against the euro? Against what? So, the better way to think about it is how? The price of gold. The price of gold. All right? This is the correct way to think about it. So, instead of thinking about the currencies, the most important price is the price of gold. In other words, what is the price for, of course, for a particular macroeconomy, the Saudi economy? What is the price of gold measured in real? Okay? Or what is the price of gold measured in Russian rubles, or in dollars, or in yen? All right, so that's the correct way. Again, it is the same concept. It is the same idea, but it's a different way to think about it. Is this good enough about macro and micro? A few more minutes. Now, we'll get some more on markets. So this is the first big topic. Now, the economics was the second big topic. Now, economics, the next big topic in economics is markets. I will get very soon the details of markets. We just want to outline which are the major markets in economics. We're still in the topic of economics. Which are the big major markets?
Money markets.
Money market, then you gotta say capital market. What other markets? Huh? Yes, but what is secondary market? Once you get into secondary market, we gotta get into the primary market. Now, we are in trouble of defining the primary market. Well, is it really that important? Huh? Okay, let's put it in there. Capital market. Capital market. This is the market where capital exchanges hands. And here capital is meant as money. It is money for financial instruments. Money for financial instruments. Capital markets. So, stock exchanges and stuff like that. Now, what other big market? Again, I'm not yet getting into the specifics of markets, just the categories. What else? What's the big market?
Commodities?
Yes, it's fairly important, but it is a very special type of another market. Well, the capital is kind of like the monetary market for money, money for money. Physical money, we call these goods. So we call these goods. What kind of goods we're talking about? Food, water, cameras, watches, shirts, pens. We call them consumer goods. Consumer goods. And within the category of goods, we always throw in one extra little thing in economics. Goods and? Services. And let's see also what else. Now, goods and services, I can use here another little name, and we call it the product market. All right? So instead of goods, we sometimes just call it products. Okay? So what you see I'm doing now is introducing a lot of terminology, and I'll be introducing a lot more when, So I'm just trying to, so when we say goods and services, sometimes just say products. So what's the next big thing, the last important market?
We say energy or it's...
No, it's not as important within the whole economy. Not as important.
Real estate.
The real estate is not as important either.
The worker.
Yes, that's the bonus point again. Worker, and we call it the labor market. The labor, well, half a point. All right? You're,
1.5.
1.5 so far. So we call it the labor market. Okay? So the capital market, the labor market, and the product markets are the three main categories. Okay? So what do businesses operate on? Firms in managerial accounting. Which markets do they operate on? Which are the main ones?
Managerial accounting?
Yes, and businesses, firms.
The goods and services and labor.
And capital too. All right, so in managerial economics, in the subject, we will deal with the goods and services, which is the most important from a managerial point of view. Then the second most important is labor. And the least important, notice, in this course is the capital market. Why is it the least important? Because it is the subject of a different course. How do we call that course? Financial management. So, we don't emphasize it here not because it's not important. It is extremely important. We just have a subject for it. Financial management. And of course, you'll get a healthy dose of this in due time, all right? So, we focus on these two, and a later course will focus or zoom in here. All right? Is this good? The next big thing, and I'm getting ready for a break, is in economics we always use models. A model. And a model is not a nice lady that walks with an outfit, right? On a catwalk. This is what usually... A model is a...
Financial model.
Okay, could be financial, could be labor. Okay, first of all, it is a theoretical construct of how inputs relate to outputs. In other words, it is a construct of how different variables. The variables may be inflation and unemployment. They may be GDP and inflation, okay? They may be wages and profits. They may be the price of a product and profitability, okay? It may be the price of a product and productivity. Again, so a model is a theoretical, abstract representation, we also call it construct, of a relationship or of the relationship between two or more economic variables or important economic variables. Usually the simplest economic models will relate one variable to another variable. Okay, these are the simplest. Sometimes you will have two variables related to another variable. The simplest example, I don't want to get into, but output, we sometimes say Y is output. Y stands for yield. Is simply, what is the output a function of? What is a function of? What does output depend on, usually, in the most abstract case? It usually depends on how much capital you use, and we use K coming from capital, as in German with K, not with C, all right? C stands for consumption, and L standing for labor, okay? Sometimes we may add other variables like technology, okay? So, a model could be two input variables and one output variable, okay? Sometimes a model can have two input variables, two output variables, and they begin to feed on each other. So these become so-called autoregressive, multiple variable autoregressive models, etc., etc. I don't want to get into that. Dynamic, etc. So it simply relates one or more variables to one or more variables. So every model has four fundamental elements. Of course, we're going to be getting some more models down the course, but what every model has is some basic underlying theory. Remember, I said it was a theoretical construct or theoretical relationship. So there's got to be some theory, all right? Now, let me tell you the simplest economic model ever, which is also the easiest to learn and understand, which I already used like 20 minutes ago, is you print more money, prices go up. So this is the model between the increase in money supply and increases in prices. This is the simplest model in economics, and actually one of the most accurate you'll ever see. Okay? So every model's got a theory. Every model's got variables. And a variable is something that changes over time. Prices of oil change over time. Prices of goods and services, the price level changes over time. Money supply, in other words, how much money the government prints and it puts in circulation. So these are the variables. Number 3, every model makes certain assumptions. Assumptions are usually statements or conditions about the economy which are taken to be true, valid, and not changing. If they're changing, then they're variables. So, variables are those that change, and assumptions those that remain constant or unchanging.
Okay, so always in economy we assume that the government should interfere. But
No, wait.
No.
No, we never assume it should interfere or not. Right now, all we are saying is simply, what is a model? We didn't say we assume it interferes, we assume it doesn't interfere. This is at a later stage. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it is desirable, most of the times it is not. Almost every time that the government interferes, it always makes things worse. All right, even you know this lesson. And then the last thing, because I can see you're impatient for a break, is causation. Causation. The example of the... Oh, turn it on. Is it on?
It's on.
The causation. Here is one causation which is patently wrong. Rising oil prices cause higher inflation. It is not true. It is never been true, and it will never be true. All right? Here is the correct causation. Increasing money supply and American government printing dollars will result in higher oil prices. In other words, because the government prints more money, the value of money falls down, and the value of oil remains almost unchanged, so the fluctuation of the price of oil actually reflects more or less not the fluctuation of the value of oil. The fluctuating price reflects the fluctuating value of the dollar. All right? Here is another example. Very volatile price of gold is said that the value of gold is not stable, right? I mean, today is 90, then it's 850, then it's 100, it's 1,000, and so forth. The answer is that's the wrong logic, and that's the wrong causation. The value of gold is shockingly stable. It has been for thousands of years stable. What the price of gold varies is actually discounting the expected future supply and value of the currency. So, if suddenly people expect the guy was going to be printing a lot more, the price of gold shoots up, discounting a lot of the printing in the future. If they decide that the government isn't going to be printing as much as they believe, the price of gold will fall, reflecting the cumulative future expected printing of dollars, meaning devaluing of dollars. So, in this sense, the value of gold is fairly stable, and its price reflects the instability of the paper currency because it discounts the currency and the value of the currency in the future, as opposed to unstable price of gold. The unstable price of gold is caused by the unstable value of gold. So, you got an example of a correct causation and false causation. So, you always have to think. The easiest way to trick you into false thinking is by implying a causation which is wrong. Like, price of gold is the value of gold is very unstable because the price fluctuates, and like rising oil prices cause inflation. So, I'm done, and we take a 5-10 minute break before we continue. Pause.